Okay, real talk.
Yeah.
How many times have you said yes when you really wanted to say no? Like, you know, the situations where you just feel pressured to agree, even if your gut is screaming run. I know I've been there more times than I'd like to admit. Just the other day, I was at the farmer's market, right? And this guy was so enthusiastic about his homemade hot sauce. He kept piling on more and more samples, and I was sweating bullets. Literally, I couldn't bring myself to tell him I actually hate spicy food. So I ended up buying a bottle I'll probably never use. But you know what? This whole experience got me thinking, why are we so afraid to say no? What is it about that little two-letter word that makes us squirm? And most importantly, how can we harness the power of no to actually get what we want in negotiations? Well, turns out there's a whole science to it. And today we're diving deep into the world of negotiation with insights from Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator. His book, Never Split the Difference, completely blew my mind and changed the way I approach these kinds of situations.
One of the most surprising things I learned from Voss is that traditional negotiation tactics, and the whole win-win and getting to yes approach, might actually be missing a crucial element: emotions. Voss argues that human decisions, even the ones we think are purely rational, are deeply influenced by our emotions. And this isn't just some random theory. It's actually backed up by a lot of research in psychology, like the work of Daniel Kahneman, who studied cognitive biases. Think about how many times have you agreed to something just to avoid conflict, or maybe because you didn't want to disappoint someone. Voss calls this the counterfeit yes, and it's something we all do. But the problem is these counterfeit yeses can lead to agreements that ultimately fall apart because they lack genuine buy-in. So what's the solution? Well, Voss suggests that instead of aiming for a yes, we should actually start by getting to no. I know, right? It sounds completely counterintuitive, but hear me out. Voss argues that getting to know creates a safer space for open and honest communication. When someone says no, they feel like they're in control, like they're not being pressured into something they don't want. This helps build trust and allows the negotiation to move forward in a more genuine way. And Voss knows a thing or two about tough conversations. I mean, the guy was an FBI hostage negotiator. His book is full of these crazy stories from his time on the job, and one that really stuck with me was about his very first hostage situation. It was a bank robbery standoff, super intense stuff. Boss was still pretty green at this point, just starting out. And he was facing this bank robber, Chris Watts, who was holed up inside, burning piles of cash and just acting erratically. It was a chaotic scene. Through a series of careful conversations, Voss managed to get one of the robbers to come out of the bank safely. And talking to this guy, Voss realized that Watts wasn't some mastermind criminal. He was just a guy who'd made some really bad choices and was scared.
Is this experience that really showed Voss the power of getting to know. When someone says no, it gives them this feeling of control, like they're not being forced into anything. And when people feel in control, they're more likely to open up to be honest about what they're really thinking and feeling. See, it all comes back to building trust, right? Voss says that no is actually the foundation of trust in a negotiation. And to get to know effectively, develop this whole system based on something he calls tactical empathy. Tactical empathy is kind of like putting yourself in the other person's shoes, but it's more than that. It's about actively listening and understanding their perspective, their needs, their fears. And it involves some really interesting techniques. One of them is called mirroring, and it's surprisingly simple but effective. Basically, you just repeat back the last few words of what the other person says. It's not about parroting them. It's more about encouraging them to keep talking, to elaborate on their thoughts. And it creates this sense of connection, like you're really paying attention. I remember this one time I was dealing with a really frustrating customer service issue. Right. I was on the phone with this rep who just wasn't getting it. They kept saying, "We can't process your request because of company policy." So I tried mirroring. I just calmly said, "Because of company policy." And you know what? It totally shifted the conversation. They actually started explaining the policy in more detail, ended up finding a workaround for me. Voss also talks about this other technique called labeling, which is basically acknowledging the other person's emotions. Like if someone seems angry, you might say, "It seems like you're feeling frustrated." By giving their emotion a name, you validate their feelings, and that can really help de-escalate tension and create understanding.
There's this great story in the book where Voss uses labeling to diffuse a potentially volatile situation at an airport. This guy was furious because his flight was delayed, and he was letting everyone know if Voss could have just ignored him or told him to calm down, but instead he labeled his frustration. He said something like, I understand this is incredibly inconvenient, and it totally disarmed the guy. He calmed down, and they were actually able to have a productive conversation. Once you've built that rapport, that trust, you can start asking questions, right? But not just any questions. Voss recommends using something called calibrated questions. These are questions that start with how or what, and they're designed to get the other person thinking and talking about their own problems and solutions. For example, instead of saying, you need to stay in the hospital, a doctor might ask a patient, what do you hope to accomplish by leaving? See the difference? This encourages the patient to think about their own motivations and to come up with their own reasons for staying. It's subtle, but powerful.
And this is where Voss's FBI experience really comes into play. He learned that to negotiate effectively, you have to understand the other person's worldview, their values, their motivations, what he calls their religion. It's about seeing the world through their eyes. There's this fascinating story in the book about Voss negotiating with a tobacco farmer who drove a tractor all the way to D.C. to protest government policies. This guy was desperate. He felt like he was losing everything and he was ready to do something drastic. Voss, he didn't judge the guy or dismiss his concerns. He listened, he asked questions, he really tried to understand where he was coming from. And by doing that, by acknowledging the farmer's religion, Voss was able to find a peaceful resolution to a situation that could have easily turned violent. So what's the point of all this? What's the big takeaway? It's that no isn't the enemy. It's actually a powerful tool for building trust, gaining control, and creating agreements that actually work for everyone involved.
But it's not enough to just get to know right. Voss says that the real goal in negotiation is to get to that what's right. This means that you've reached a point of genuine understanding, a point where both sides feel like they've been heard and that their perspective is valued. Getting to that's right takes effort. It's about really listening to the other person, summarizing what they've said and paraphrasing it back to them in a way that shows you get it. It's not just agreeing with them, it's showing them that you truly understand their point of view. Voss shares a story about a former student who was trying to get a new job at his old company. He really wanted this position, but he was up against some tough competition. So he decided to use Voss's that's right strategy. He met with his old boss, and instead of focusing on his own qualifications, he focused on understanding his boss's needs. He asked questions, he listened, and he was able to identify some unstated needs that his boss had. And when he was able to articulate those needs back to his boss in a way that made him say, that's right, he knew he had the job.
It's like once you get to that's right, you've unlocked this whole new level of trust and collaboration. It's pretty amazing. But Voss doesn't stop there. He also emphasizes the importance of influencing people behind the scenes. Like, let's say you're negotiating a big contract, right? You might be focused on the person across the table, but what about their boss or their colleagues? These people might not be directly involved in the negotiation, but they can still have a huge impact on the outcome. So how do you influence these hidden decision makers? Well, Voss says it all comes down to understanding their motivations. What do they care about? What are their goals? Once you know that, you can start tailoring your message in a way that resonates with them. And this got me thinking, how often do we get so caught up in the immediate negotiation that we forget about the bigger picture? How can we be more strategic in our approach to influencing the people who really matter? It's definitely something I'm going to be paying more attention to in my own life.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize that Never Flip the Difference isn't just about negotiation tactics. It's really about understanding human psychology, about building relationships, and about getting what you want in a way that benefits everyone involved. So I think the biggest takeaway from Never Split the Difference is this. Instead of fearing no, we should embrace it. It's not a rejection. It's an opportunity. It's a chance to build trust, gain control, and ultimately reach agreements that work for everyone involved. And the best part is, these techniques, they're not just for hostage negotiations or boardrooms, you can use them in your everyday life at work, at home, even at that farmer's market. I remember this one time I was trying to convince my friend to go on this crazy hiking trip with me. It was like a really challenging trail, and she was super hesitant. Instead of pushing her to say yes, I actually encouraged her to voice her concerns. I asked her, "What's making you say no?" And she opened up about her fear of heights and her worries about not being fit enough. By acknowledging her no, I was able to address her concerns, reassure her, and ultimately we ended up having an amazing adventure together.
So I challenge you to use this. Pay attention to the power of no in your own life. Notice how it can shift dynamics and open up new possibilities. You might be surprised at what you discover. And that's it for our deep dive into the power of no. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and remember, no might just be the key to getting what you really want.